my previous video, I covered a game that really stuck in the knife into shooters for me. And while 1942 was not a terrible game really, it was just the straw that broke the camel's back, as I was sick to death of this kind of game by that time. I had no fond memories of the game. The only thing I could remember about playing it back in the day was that it was the shooter that ended my interest in the genre. And so, for about 8 years, I never paid any attention to that kind of game. And some people say I may have missed out, as there were tons of games in that time that were good. Games like Tiger Heli, Flying Shark and Twin Cobra. But to me, these were all from a dead genre. Even when I got my Mega Drive in 1990, I could have got Truxton, as this was a launch title, but I showed no interest in that either. But in 1994, I had a change of heart, and that was brought about all because of this absolute cracker of a game. Batsugun is a vertically scrolling shooter that was vastly different from other shooters, and while this shooter was developed by Toaplan, who are responsible for the previous shooters I mentioned, this one looked very different. You see, what made this game stand out and appeal to me was just how many enemies and enemy projectiles you could get on screen at any one time. I mean, just look at it. This type of shooter was more like a sub-genre of shooter, and it was called a Bullett-Hell shooter. This kind of thing was new to me, but it had been popular back in Japan for years. So, let me try to explain the definition of this. A Bullett-Hell, or barrage, or bullet curtain is a subgenre of shooters in which the screen becomes crowded with complex curtain fire enemy patterns. It is also characterised by collision boxes that are smaller than the sprites themselves, to accommodate manoeuvring through these crowded firing patterns. As you can see, the term curtain fire is probably the most accurate description of this kind of game. As you can imagine, a game this crazy would not have been too popular in arcades in the West. So when Toaplan released Batsugun to the world, it was a massive gamble, and they had to take this gamble. In 1993, Toaplan were really struggling financially. Even though they had made some really good games, they just couldn't get a break. And so, with one last roll of the dice, they bet the farm on Batsugun and lost. By spring 1994, Toaplan had went into administration and then bankruptcy, and many of its now former employees had to seek their fortunes elsewhere. Some went on to form their own companies, such as Cave and Takumi, but for Toaplan, Batsugun was their swan song. And what a game it was. I have to be honest, this game was pointed out to me by a mate when we were in Booth's Enterprise. He shouted over to me that I simply had to come and see this game. Of course, I ignored him and continued on with whatever I was playing. It was probably Samurai Showdown. But once I was finished and went over to speak to him, from the look on his face, I could tell he was struggling to keep up with the game. He had this look of desperate struggle and the I need help look. So when I looked at the monitor, my jaw dropped and I had to pick it back up. I had never seen such a huge amount of enemy fire on screen at one time. It was just absolutely wild. And while my mate looked like he was sweating buckets, I could see he was loving it. And after he gave up, and after 8 years, I finally played another vertical scrolling shooter. And I frickin' loved this game. Now, maybe it was like the cracker situation that Eddie Murphy described in his stand-up comedy Raw. Maybe years and years away from this kind of game left me hungry for a decent shooter. Or maybe it was purely down to how great this game is. And it's definitely the latter. This game is simply outstanding. Visually, it's impressive. Even at a time when arcades were starting to fill up with 3D polygon racers like Virtua Racing and Ridge Racer, and polygon fighters like Virtua Fighter and Tekken, this game looked like it was making very good use of the advancing technology of the time. Bright, large fire, loads of enemy projectiles spraying all over the screen, some really impressive backdrops meant this was like a rainbow in a TV screen. It was so full of colour and so busy. It was just really pleasing on the eyes. The enemy craft explode in this kind of overlaid digital explosion, coupled with the flying collectibles and points sliding all over the screen. This is how I always wanted my shooters to look. Like an absolute carnival of bullets, and super smooth with it. The sound is extraordinary as well. The music is so fast paced and heart thumping, it really suits the action, especially the end of level bosses. And then when you add in all the extra effects for the shots, explosions, power ups and the like, well, a lot is going on in this game, and you need to have your wits about you. And this is no more evident than when you play it. The whole screen can just start to fill up really quickly, but thankfully the collision box is really small to allow you to weave your way through the maelstrom of fire. But even so, this is one tough game. Playing it back then cost me a fortune, but now I just play it on MAME with an invincibility cheat. It's the only way to progress through the game. power-ups are just insane as well. I mean, they do look very similar to those in Truxton, but it is a Toaplan game, so no need to worry about pinching ideas from someone else there. In 1994, when I played this, I was really shocked. I never ever thought that the vertical scrolling shooter would be a game that I ever played again. But Batsugun really struck a chord in me. The immensely challenging and addictive gameplay, with really great visuals and excellent soundtrack, really made this a true 5-star game in my opinion. And it was a real shame that Toaplan was not really around long enough to enjoy its success. But what a game to go out on, I tell you. This game was ported over to the Sega Saturn in 1996, but I had shifted focus over to the Sony PlayStation, and it never came out on that. It would take many years before it appeared on a PlayStation, and by then, if I wanted to play it, I could have a go on MAME. And I still do this, as this is definitely in my go-to list when bored at work. After the initial launch of Batsugun, Toaplan would cease development of shooting projects prior to their closure on March 31st, 1994. A sequel was planned, but was never released, which was a real shame. Batsugun really introduced a whole new dimension to vertically scrolling shooters, and those former employees I mentioned earlier would go on to release other Bullett-Hell games, which were also damned impressive. But that is a video for another time. And that was my look back at Batsugun. If you like this video, then please do give me a sub and a thumbs up, or maybe even a comment or two below about your memories of Batsugun. And a massive thank you to all of those who have subscribed to my channel. Your feedback and support really does go a long way in helping the channel grow, and I do appreciate all of the feedback and comments, so thank you from me. And that's all from me, folks. Thanks for watching.